They say the trees talk in the dark. Not with voices, exactly, but with the language of creaks, hisses, and sighs, the tongue of old woods that remember too much. In the dense, dripping forests that fringe the outskirts of Lanton Hollow, Missouri, the trees have long memories, and they do not forget what happened in the year of our Lord, 1832. I wasn't there when the boys were born. Few were, but even now, at the very edge of my memory, I can hear the name Gorham said with a hush of reverence and fear. I was a child when my grandfather would sit by the fire, his pipe cold in his hand, and stare into the flame as though watching it replay something only he could see. Not right, he'd whisper. Born wrong. Not from her womb, but the woods. I used to think he was drunk, or haunted, maybe both. But the older I get, the more the land around here feels stained, like blood scrubbed off old wood, the shadow of it still clinging beneath your fingernails. There are places near Lanton Hollow no one ventures after dusk, not because of bears or wolves, but because of the quiet, an unnatural quiet that makes your bones feel loose and your prayers thin. The Gorham homestead sat 3 miles out past the old mill, with a road narrowed into a broken path half swallowed by underbrush and thorn. Folks stopped visiting that way sometime before the summer of '32, and though the land was fertile and the river generous with its fish, nobody tried to settle nearby. Something about the air, it had the wrong taste. Old Widow Lantry, who kept a journal sharper than most men's rifles, wrote of hearing sobbing sounds like babies, but too deep and slow, like a child trying to remember how to breathe, near the Gorham woods. Her letter to her sister in St. Louis remains tucked in our local archives, faded and trembling in its cursive. Most accounts begin in July of that year, the air thick with cicadas and dust. That was when Joseph Gorham, a man of few words and fewer friends, trudged into town with blood on his sleeves and horror in his eyes. "She's screaming," was all he said. Sheriff Dayton and a young farmhand named Elias followed him back to the house. Elias didn't last long after. Took to drinking, then disappeared one winter. Dayton, well, he retired not long after the incident. Wouldn't speak of it. Carved a wooden crucifix every Sunday and nailed them around his property until the fence looked like a graveyard. What they found in the Gorham home has never been fully recorded. Only that Mary Gorham had given birth, triplets, they said, and that none of them cried. No wails, no breathy gasps, just silence. The midwife, Martha Peabody, never returned to town. Her horse was found wandering the riverbank, saddle empty, eyes wide. Some say she fled south. Others claim she jumped into the Merrimack River with stones in her pockets. As for the boys, well, that's the beginning of this horror, isn't it? The few who glimpsed them described them not as infants, but as things shaped like infants. Their skin was pale, not the pink of the living, but the gray-white of wet clay. Their limbs drooped unnaturally. Their fingers were long and too flexible. They did not blink. They did not feed. But their eyes, oh, their eyes, held something ancient, as though they remembered being something else before this. They were not baptized. Reverend Claiborne refused, calling them godless forms. He told the town that such children could not be saved, that they were not souls encased in flesh, but echoes of something darker. That week, he packed his wagon and left. His chapel stood empty for months after. Yet the Gorhams kept the boys. Raised them, if such a word applies. Strange noises began to drift downwind from the woods. Clicking sounds, like teeth tapping against teeth. Whispers that didn't ride the wind but slithered beneath it. Children started having night terrors. Speaking of the soft brothers, who stood at the edge of their dreams and watched with melting faces. Animals grew sick near the Gorham path. Livestock miscarried. Horses balked and whinnied if led too close. The woods themselves seemed to thicken, growing more tangled and oppressive. Hunters returned with their eyes hollow and their hands shaking. One claimed the trees had moved while he was inside, roots changing places, branches curling downward like fingers. No one dared accuse the Gorhams outright, but the town whispered, and the whispers fed the trees. My grandfather, who swore he once saw the boys peering from the attic window, used to say, "You can't unmake what's born from a place like that. The soil remembers." Sometimes I wonder why no one tried harder to stop it, to act, but fear is a strange creature. It paralyzes the good and galvanizes the wicked. And in those days, everyone thought someone else would handle it. Now, nearly a century has passed, and the Gorham house is little more than stone and soot. The roof caved in, the cellar locked tight. But some nights, especially in the thick heat of July, I swear I can still hear the trees whispering. And they speak not in memory, but in warning, because nothing truly born in silence ever stays silent forever. They say when Mary Gorham went into labor, the sky turned the color of old bruises. The sun dimmed behind clouds that hadn't been forecast, and the birds, those loud, shrill gossips of the forest, fell mute as if in mourning. It was early July, too early for storms, but the air hung thick with pressure, the kind that makes dogs whine and windows rattle without reason. Joseph Gorham rode his mule into town at a breakneck pace, shirt plastered to his back with sweat and something darker, blood. At first, folks thought Mary had died in childbirth. A tragedy, yes, but not uncommon in those days. Yet when Joseph opened his mouth to speak, no words came out, just a dry rattle, like a man choking on his own name. Sheriff Dayton and young Elias joined him on the return trip. The sheriff's journal from that day was later found half-burned in the church fireplace. Only a few pages legible. One entry reads, "The screams did not sound like hers. Too deep, too wide, as if something else was tearing free. Elias will not speak. And Joseph, he watches the floor as if afraid it might open. The house, when they arrived, was silent. Too silent. The kind of silence that hums in the skull, pressing against your eardrums until you feel your own heartbeat in your teeth. Mary was upstairs, soaked in sweat, hair matted to her forehead like seaweed. The bed was soaked through. Blood, yes, but something else too. Something clear and viscous, pooling on the floorboards and seeping between cracks like sap from a dying tree. The boys had been born. All three of them. Triplets are rare enough. But what Mary bore was no ordinary miracle. They did not cry. Not one of them. They lay on the bed, motionless but breathing, or rather, pulsing. That was how Elias later described it, in the one letter he dared to write before vanishing. They didn't breathe like babies do. They pulsed. Their chests moved like jellyfish. No ribs. No bones. Just shapes. Sheriff Dayton dared to touch one. His fingers sank into the flesh like poking chilled dough. The skin was cold, not from the air, but inherently wrong, like the warmth of life had never touched it. And yet their eyes were open, wide, watching, as if studying the world they just entered, but not with curiosity, with recognition. Joseph wouldn't come near them. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed like he was holding himself together. Mary, though Mary smiled. "They came back to me," she whispered. The sheriff asked what she meant, but she wouldn't elaborate. Just stroked the forehead of the nearest one, its skin pale and translucent, faint blue veins pulsing like slow rivers beneath a sheet of wax paper. Elias vomited in the hallway. Sheriff Dayton told Joseph to fetch the preacher. Reverend Claiborne arrived within the hour, face red from exertion, clutching his Bible like a weapon. When he entered the room, he stopped short. The twins, as we called them before learning there were three, had arranged themselves in a triangle, not by Mary's hand. No one had moved them. They'd slithered into position, while no one watched. That much was certain. Claiborne began to recite scripture. He didn't get far. His voice cracked by the second verse. One of the boys, the smallest, turned his head toward the reverend, opened his mouth, and made a sound no one could later describe. Not a cry, not a growl, but something that made the candles in the room flicker, and the mirror above the wash basin fractured down the center. Claiborne dropped his Bible and fled. He told Joseph, in front of a crowd, that he would not christen the children, that he would not mark their names in the book. "These are not lambs of God," he said. "They are goats, hollow goats in the shape of infants." Mary never forgave him. She wouldn't let anyone else in the house after that, not even her sister, who tried to bring food and blankets. She kept the boys close, wrapped in damp cloth, never letting them out of her sight. Stranger still, she began to change. Her hair grayed at the roots within a month. Her voice grew distant, like it came from another room. And her eyes, God help me, her eyes took on that same far-off sheen the boys carried. as though she were slipping slowly into whatever place they had come from. The townsfolk grew restless. Some whispered about demons. Others spoke of curses. The native tribes nearby had long warned settlers about the woods beyond the mill, calling them the deep place where earth and sky fell wrong. A midwife's testimony surfaced years later, scribbled on the back of a prayer card found in her abandoned shack. The birth canal weeps, but not for joy. These are not the cries of infants. They are the echoes of something clawing back into flesh. And yet Mary loved them, cradled them, sang to them in a low, wet whisper none of us could decipher. What prayer does a mother offer to things like that? And more terrifying still, what if they answered? In the weeks that followed their birth, the townsfolk came to refer to the Gorham children only in whispers and never by name, if they had names at all. Some claimed Mary had called them Ephraim, Elias, and Enoch, but others, who had stood near the house and dared to listen, said she called them by no name spoken in the Bible, just sounds, clicks, hums, and low groans that seemed too ancient for human tongues. The boys never left the house, not even to touch the porch. But those who dared pass by swore they saw movement in the windows, slow, deliberate, like eels coiling behind frosted glass. One child, a brave or foolish lad named Tommy Albridge, climbed onto a fence post and peeked into the parlor window. What he saw never left him. He told his mother they were made of dough, that their skin folded in places it shouldn't, like cloth sinking into itself, that their eyes had no whites, just deep gray, like river stones polished by years of current, and that when one of them looked at him, he didn't feel seen, he felt measured. The town doctor, Rupert Harrow, insisted on a medical visit. Mary refused him, but he came anyway, citing civic duty and moral concern. What he found behind the Gorham door was more than he could fathom. His notes, found decades later in a sealed tin beneath the floorboard of his practice, are filled with tremulous handwriting and dark ink blotches where the pen had hesitated or trembled. Their bones are not bones. Upon palpation, there is no resistance, only pliable density, like warm wax. Their heads change shape when touched, not with the malleability of infancy, but like sacs of fluid. No pulse, no breath, and yet they observe. He noted that their mouths did not open naturally, but stretched, that their limbs, though stubby and infantile, extended farther than they should under the right light, that one of them blinked sideways, and, most disturbing of all, that none of them ever seemed to sleep. Eyes wide at all hours, he wrote, as though they are waiting for something. Within 2 days, Dr. Harrow closed his practice and boarded a steamer heading east. He left behind all his tools, his notes, and his wife. The last letter he sent from Philadelphia simply read, "I touched something God did not intend." Inside the Gorham home, changes were underway. The furniture was pushed to the walls. Curtains were torn down. Floors scrubbed raw. Mary said she needed space for them to move, though no one outside could explain what that meant. A chimney sweep, conscripted by Joseph to unclog the old flue, described as strange, sour smell coming from the hearth, like clay after rain, but deeper, ranker. Inside he found not soot, but strands of pale hair and something like molted skin, curled and cracked like old paint. The boys grew, but not as normal children do. Their limbs lengthened disproportionately. Their skin, one soft and translucent, darkened to the color of river mud. They made no sounds, save for the occasional clicking of their jaws or the low, rhythmic thumping against the floorboards at night, a sound that didn't match the weight of their bodies, but carried through the beams like a pendulum. One night, during a storm, lightning struck an elm near the house and split it to the core. Inside the blackened trunk were handprints, not burned in but shaped from within, as if something had been curled inside the wood, pressing out. The tree was chopped down and burned by frightened locals, but the ash refused to scatter in the wind. It settled in patterns, spirals, and nested ovals, much like the marks found on the boy's skin. It was Elias, the smallest, who first moved upright. Sheriff Dayton, in one of his final lucid visits to town, claimed to have seen it through a rain-streaked window, a child-shaped figure walking not with the wobble of toddlerhood, but with the smooth, measured grace of something that had worn human skin before. Its head turned as he passed. He left town that same week. Soon after, a rash of animals began disappearing, cats, dogs, even a goat from the Baxter farm. No blood was found. No tracks. Just silence, broken fences, and a lingering musk in the air like stagnant water and turned soil. Mary began to change more noticeably. Her face thinned, her smile too wide. She spoke to no one but the boys. And her voice, once gentle, now echoed strangely, as though bouncing from walls not yet built. She sang to them in that same tongue of clicks and murmurs, and sometimes the boys would answer, never in words, just motions, a tilt of the head, a shifting of limbs, a silence that responded. No doctor dared come. No preacher returned. And Joseph? He no longer slept in the main house. He took to sleeping in the barn, clutching a worn pistol and carving strange symbols into beams with rusted nail. When asked why, he'd mutter, "They listen, through the walls, through the wood." But still no one intervened. Fear had sown its seeds deep, and the harvest was silence. The town turned its gaze away. They told themselves it was grief, madness, a sorrowed woman and broken man, losing their grip. But late at night, when the wind carried strange rhythms through the trees, when the air tasted like copper and rain, they'd lie awake and wonder if the clay children still watched from their hollow home, waiting to shape the world in their image, because they were not born of flesh and bone. They were something else entirely. And clay remembers the hands that molded it. The Gorham house did not rot. It did not creak like old homes should. It simply settled, as though it were exhaling slowly into the earth, deeper each season, like something burrowing rather than crumbling. By 1833, the structure had begun to lose its sharp corners. The roof sagged, though not from disrepair. It drooped like a watchful eyelid. The walls bowed inward slightly, and the porch warped as if recoiling from soil. Locals started calling it the Hollow House. Those who dared walk by claimed it gave off no sound, not even the usual pop of contracting wood, or the scurry of mice beneath floorboards. It had no voice, no echo, only a stillness that pressed against the skin, a dead weight of silence that clung to the throat and made it hard to breathe. Children refused to walk past it. Animals gave it a wide berth. And still, Mary Gorham stayed within, her movements barely glimpsed through stained curtains drawn too tightly, too long. The chimney smoked irregularly, thick, oily clouds that smelled faintly of burned hair and wet dirt. Then the stories began. Quiet ones, unconfirmed. The Miller boy, only 9, went missing for an afternoon. When he returned, clothes muddied and eyes glassy, he wouldn't speak. Not at first. When pressed, he said he'd seen something move beneath the house, something long and thin, pale as milk and smooth like stone, something that spoke without words. He claimed it asked him for a name. His mother sent for the priest, but no one came. That winter, a hunter named Blake Ridge took shelter near the Gorham woods when his horse broke a leg. He built a fire just beyond the tree lean and awoke to the sound of whispering behind him, not voices, but mimicry. The sound of his own fire popping, his own breath hitching, his own heart thudding, copied slightly out of sync, like the forest was practicing the shape of him. He fled on foot, limping back to town with frostbitten fingers and lips torn from biting back screams. He would not speak the house's name, not even once. Within the Gorham house, time unraveled oddly. One window always glowed with candlelight, sometimes in the dead of day. Sometimes the glow came not from within, but from behind the walls themselves, like a lantern trapped in flesh. Mary no longer came into town. Joseph, when seen, had taken a muttering to himself, his nails crusted with dirt, his cheeks hollow as the house itself. He left supplies at the doorstep and never went in. Sometimes he slept in the garden shed, wrapped in canvas and chains. Once, old Mrs. Alcott saw him weeping and whispering to a length of rope. "I asked him to take them," he said. "I begged, but nothing hollow could be filled." Inside, something moved. That much was certain. Though no feet touched the soil, there were sounds, wet thuds from upstairs, the slow dragging of something heavy and soft across floorboards. Neighbors spoke of wet breathing carried on the wind, and shadows that didn't match the moonlight. One man saw a hand at the upstairs window, not pressing the glass, but floating behind it, pale and jointless like a slug forming fingers. One spring evening, a traveling merchant approached the home. He knocked, ignoring warnings, eager to sell trinkets and linens. The door opened after 3 knocks. but not wide, just enough to show darkness and the smell of damp clay. A child stood there. At least something in the shape of a child. It was dressed in stitched rags that looked damp, and its head tilted impossibly far as it studied the merchant. It blinked slowly once, twice. No expression, no movement. The air behind it buzzed softly, as though flies were humming beneath the floorboards. The merchant stepped back, muttering an apology. The door closed. No footsteps sounded within. He left town before nightfall. After that, the stories changed. The house was no longer considered just strange. It was wrong. Something about its angles began to warp. Window frames became trapezoidal. The chimney slanted too far east. It no longer looked like it belonged to this world. Mrs. Langford claimed the attic window once opened and stayed ajar for days. Rain poured in, yet no water damage followed. And when she passed again, the window had closed from the outside. Local boys dared one another to touch the porch. One did. He returned with his hand trembling and said the wood was not wood. It was soft, he whispered, like skin that wasn't warm. Still no one entered. Not even when the lights glowed for hours without movement. Not even when sounds, chanting perhaps, floated downwind, low and rhythmic, like lullabies sung in reverse. And not even when the structure itself seemed to shift, as though settling closer to the earth with each passing season. There were reports, though unproven, of thin figures glimpsed crawling across the roof at dusk. Not climbing, but slithering, moving like things without bones. And then came the laughter, not joyous, not childlike, but stuttering, broken laughter like a phonograph skipping, looping the sound of mirth without meaning. It echoed out one night during a full moon, spilling over the orchard like spilled ink. It stopped every dog in town from barking. One man's teeth cracked in his sleep. That was when folks stopped speaking the name altogether. They called it the place beyond the field, or simply the Hollow. Mail stopped being delivered. Supplies were left at the forked oak, never closer. And inside the hollow house, behind warped wood and whispering walls, the children of clay remained, watching, growing, waiting. Because a house doesn't have to breathe to be alive, and some homes aren't built. They're grown. It was late August when Pastor Alton Bell arrived in Lanton Hollow, summoned by a desperate letter and a string of rumors that stank of brimstone. He came from Arkansas by horseback, his coat dusty, his Bible worn from fire and use. He was not a man given to flights of superstition. A veteran of tent revivals and snake-handling congregations, Pastor Bell had cast out more than his fair share of demons, real and imagined. He believed in the power of the word. And he believed, as he would later write, that evil, true evil, only flourished where silence reigned. The people of Lanton Hollow met him with a sort of hope one only extends to men bound to disappointment. They didn't tell him the full truth, just pieces. The house, they said, was cursed, a family fallen into decay, children born touched by something foul, enough to stir a godly man's sense of duty, but not enough to send him fleeing. He listened quietly, took notes, prayed with the town elders. When asked he was sure he wanted to go up there alone, he simply nodded and said, "If this house has lost the light of God, then I will bring it back, and if it has never known it, then I shall bear it in." He entered the woods that same evening, satchel on his back, Bible in one hand, lantern in the other. He was never seen again. They waited for his return. A day passed, then two. On the third morning, a search party was formed. 5 men armed with rifles and torches. They followed the narrow track to the Gorham property, past the forked oak, where packages were left and no footsteps ever returned. The house looked as it always had, sagging silent, more fungus than home. The door was closed. The windows were dark. No sign of Pastor Bell. But the moment they stepped onto the property, the birds in the trees fell silent, and a strange stillness crept across the clearing, the kind that makes the back of the neck sweat and the bowels stir. They did not go in. No one crossed the threshold. Instead, they circled the property and found strange signs, a child's shoe half buried in the earth, too clean for the mud around it, a torn strip of black cloth snag on the fence, as if someone had been pulled. Most chilling of all was what they found at the base of the orchard tree. Pastor Bell's Bible, tore to shreds, the pages scattered and stuffed into the hollows of the trees. not just wedged or dropped, stuffed tightly and deliberately, as though something wanted to hide them in wood. The cover had been flayed from it. On one page, the words from Psalm 23 were inked over in dark, muddy streaks. Not erased. Drowned. They brought back what they could salvage. The town declared him missing. His name was carved onto the church memorial. But no one spoke it aloud. Not after what happened the following week. The church bell rang in the dead of night. No one had touched it. No wind had stirred. Yet the clanging echoed across the fields, long and slow, like a funeral toll played backwards. When they rushed to the chapel, they found the doors open, the altar overturned, and something written on the wall in what smelled like copper and spoiled milk. It was a single word. Echo. No one could make sense of it. But old Grandpa Fitch claimed it was a name, not of a person, but a condition. That house, he said, trembling in his rocker, that house don't make children. It makes echoes of things we ought not remember. Two boys who dared venture toward the house that week returned pale and trembling. They said they heard a man's voice whispering scripture from beneath the floorboards, twisted, slow verses, repeating low, "I walked through the valley." Over and over, the words degrading into nonsense. Others began to dream of a man wandering to the house barefoot, eyes gone white, clutching a lantern that cast no light. He would murmur prayers, but they came out backward. Some claimed the dreams were shared, identical in detail. One night, Mary Gorham was seen standing on the roof, arms raised, face turned toward the stars. No ladder was found, no evidence of how she got there. Just footprints along the shingles, too many for one person. They curved in circles, patterns that pulsed if you stared too long. When asked later, she only smiled and said, "He walked into the walls. The walls are full now." Then she returned inside and closed the door. Rumors grew. Some claimed Pastor Bell had never left, that he'd become part of the house, that its rot now carried his voice, its windows his eyes. Others believed he had been dragged below, into the cellar that no one dared open, or that his soul had been bartered, turned into one of those strange, giggling echoes that sometimes flitted through the trees on still nights. There was talk of exorcism, of burning the place down, but no one acted. It was as if the house itself knew when plans were made and pressed its dread upon the hearts of men, until courage turned to ash. The bell never rang again. But sometimes just before dawn, if you stood very still near the orchard's edge, you could hear paper rustling, like dry pages turning in invisible hands. And, faintly, a voice, low, tired, and endless, whispering the same verse over and over, long after the breath should have run out. "Yeah, though I walk through the valley, though I walk. Whatever happened to Pastor Bell, he never came back. But he was not gone, not entirely. Dr. Malcolm Trumbull did not believe in curses, demons, or ghosts. He believed in science, blood, bone, tissue, reason. He believed that everything could be cataloged, explained, dissected. That belief lasted precisely 1 hour and 17 minutes inside the Gorham house. He came from St. Louis, lured by the strange account of Dr. Harrow and whispers of children who did not age normally, who lacked structure beneath their skin. He had studied deformities before, hydrocephalus, osteogenesis imperfecta, even teratomas. He believed the Gorham triplets were just another grotesque twist of nature, an unfortunate set of medical anomalies. He came prepared, with books, tools, and a letter from the Missouri Medical Board granting him permission to examine the children. Joseph Gorham signed it with a trembling hand, his eyes distant, as if he already knew the outcome. Mary said nothing, only led Trumbull inside with a placid smile and a low hum, the same wet-sounding lullaby she'd sung since the boy's birth. The doctor would never leave the household. What we know of his visit comes from the journal recovered from his satchel, found half buried beneath the rotting boards of the porch 6 months later. The last page was smudged with something dark, the writing jagged and frantic. He began, as all doctors do, with observation. The boys did not flinch when approached. They sat in a row, silent, watching him with those still, pebble-gray eyes. Their faces lacked expression, but not awareness. It was as if they were waiting for him to begin, or for something else entirely. The orchard knows your name before you're born. It remembers your mother's sins, and it sings them to the roots. That summer, the moaning intensified. It was not constant. It came at night, and always between the hours of 2 and 4, when the town slept deepest. The sound would rise from the orchard like a breath, long and wet and aching. It carried across the fields like fog, and within it, if one listened too closely, were voices, not full words, fragments, repetitions, dig, return, below, mother, and woven through all was laughter, soft, staggered laughter like something trying to remember how it was made. The Langfords moved away. Others boarded their windows. And still the orchard leaned. Then came the day Mary Gorham was seen dancing beneath the trees. She was barefoot, her hair loose and matted, her gown soaked to the waist in dark fluid. She moved between the trunks as though pulled on strings, her arms wide, her mouth open in song, though no sound came out. The children, those clay-born boys, followed. They did not walk. They drifted, feet never quite touching the earth. The trees bent toward them. One even cracked its own trunk to lower closer. Witnesses, 3 boys hunting for squirrels on the ridge, watched until the youngest passed out. The other 2 returned to town and refused to speak until their hair turned gray at the temples. A week later, strange figures appeared. Shapes were seen moving among the trees at night, too tall, too thin, too wrong. One had arms that hung to the ground, dragging behind like wet cloth. Another had no face, just a soft concavity that emitted a faint humming. They never left the orchard. They circled, watched, waited. Farmers reported growths in their fields, vines with gray leaves, roots that pulled up fence posts. The soil near the orchard turned soft, spongy, like over-kneaded bread. Livestock refused to graze nearby. One cow wandered in and was found days later with its body emptied and skin intact, hanging from a tree like a forgotten coat. Then, the orchard began to expand. Slowly, a few feet each month, the tree line crept outward. New trunks appeared overnight, knotted saplings with whispering leaves. The moaning came more often, more intense. It was not just sound, it was pressure, pushing against the eardrums, whispering into dreams. And with it came dreams. The townsfolk suffered strange visions. Men woke screaming, convinced their legs were rooted in the bed. Women wept, dreaming of children made of earth and water, pulling them down beneath the roots. Infants born in town came still, their mouths open as if screaming, but no sound escaped. The orchard, it seemed, was no longer just trees. It had become an organ, a pulsing, listening, breathing part of something vast and ancient, a memory, a wound. And the children, those soft, boneless things of whisper and echo, they had found in it something like kin, or perhaps something older still, because the orchard no longer belonged to the Gorhams. It never had. It belonged to them. And now it was growing. There was a time when Mary Gore was a pride of Lanton Hollow, a gentle woman with a soft voice, hands skilled in sewing and song, and a smile that made even the sternest of men pause. But that Mary was gone. What remained in her place was a pale shade with sunken eyes and cracked lips, who walked barefoot in the mud, speaking to things no one could see. In the final years of her visible life, Mary no longer spoke to neighbors, nor did she answer the door unless coaxed by moonlight. She ceased writing. She ceased praying. She ceased being Mary. What she became was something else, devoted, fervent, maddened by love twisted into worship. Her days were spent crafting, not clothing or lacework, as she once had, but totems. Strange, hunched figures made from clay scooped from beneath the house, bound in braided hair and scraps of cloth. They had no eyes, no mouths, only open, ring-like hollows where features should be. She hung them from the trees, nailed them above thresholds, lined the windows with them, their little heads tilted inward, as if they watched the boys sleep. Some of them moved. Neighbors swore they shifted position from one day to the next. One morning, a young man delivering grain saw that a totem had been replaced by something larger, a figure shaped like a mother cradling 3 infants, their faces all identical and melted. The next day it was gone, leaving behind a wet indentation on the sill. Joseph found her once in the cellar, kneeling in the dark, hands submerged in a basin of thick, gray slurry. She murmured to it, her voice raw, her eyes blank. Around her were symbols scratched into the stone floor. Not letters, not drawings, just shapes, spirals, hooks, branching lines like roots reaching towards something deep and unseen. He asked her what she was doing. "They need me," she said, smiling. "I must feed the likeness." After that, he stopped going down there. She called the boys her blessings, her saviors, her return. She claimed they were sent not as punishment, but as tests, trials of her devotion. She said they were not malformed but correct, made not in the image of man, but in the first image, the shape the world once knew before time and skin became prison walls. Their softness is freedom, she told the wind. Their hollow is truth. At night, she lit candles in every window and sat in the attic, rocking slowly, whispering their names. Not just the ones she'd given them, but others, older ones. Names that caused windows to tremble and candles to flicker. One by one, her belongings vanished. Furniture was dismantled, splinters of it carved into tiny figurines, and placed along the floorboards like a procession. Mirrors were shattered, curtains torn. Her bed was found dragged into the orchard, where it decayed untouched by rain. She slept beneath the trees after that. Joseph grew thinner, more withdrawn. He wandered the field with a gun he never loaded, muttering phrases like, "It's already begun," and "The clay remembers, but the blood forgets." No one knew what he meant. Mary's final journal, found buried inside a wall cavity decades later, was a mix of prayers, ramblings, and confessions. Pages curled with moisture, ink smeared as if wept upon. One page read, "They showed me the first womb. It was not of flesh, but of stone and water. The first children came not from love, but from hunger. I am only clay, but I can shape myself. I could be useful." She believed herself chosen, not just a mother, but to midwife something greater, something waiting in the roots of the orchard, in the beams of the house, in the soft, slippery limbs of her sons. She began referring to them as the tenders, not by name but by function. "The tenders of Hollow," she wrote, "born without bones so they may shape, born without blood so they may carry, born without sin because they remember." She built a shrine in the parlor, once a warm room filled with sunlight and old furniture. Now it was choked with dried herbs, animal bones, and those ever-watching totems. At its center sat a large basin of slick gray clay, covered by a tattered baptismal cloth. No one dared lift it. A traveling nun who stayed briefly at the Langford farm claimed she saw Mary under the orchard trees one dawn, pressing her hands against the soil, then pressing her own belly as if transferring something between them. "She thinks she's still giving birth," the nun said, "but not to children, to places." And perhaps she was. For even the land itself began to change. The air near the Gorham property grew humid and thick, as though the veil between worlds had thinned. Trees dripped with moisture even in drought. The earth was warm to the touch, pulsing faintly if you laid a hand on it. Mary's final act of devotion was heard, not seen. A scream, not of pain but of joy, erupted one night from within the cellar. High, shrill, cracked like glass in flame. It rang through the bones of every animal for miles. Dogs wailed. Horses kicked their stalls. One old woman died in her sleep. Her heart stopped mid-beat. Afterward, silence. When Joseph broke open the cellar door the next morning, he found only damp footprints leading downward and the faint scent of milk and rot. Mary was gone. Her last words, carved into the doorframe with her own fingernails, read, "I opened wide and let them out." And from that day forward, the orchard groaned louder. The boys no longer waited inside. And the house? The house smiled. It ended, or so they thought, with fire. One bitter January night, long after the last supply runner dared approach, and Joseph Gorham had not been seen in days, a flicker of orange appeared in the sky above the orchard, then rose into a pillar. Flames licked the heavens, crowned in black smoke that bent sideways like something fleeing. The trees didn't burn. The orchard remained untouched. But the Gorham house, that hollow place, howled. It wasn't the roar of wood catching. It was deeper, a wet, guttural wail, like something being torn from its nest too soon. By morning, the townspeople gathered on the ridge. None would cross the orchard's edge, but they watched. The house was gone. Not smoldering, not collapsed, gone. Reduced to ash and blackened timbers. All but the cellar. Its slanted hatch remained, charred but closed. The hinges warped, the padlock twisted but intact. No flames had touched it. No smoke had escaped from below. It sat in the middle of ruin like a stone heart, still beating. The townsfolk waited for movement. None came. Sheriff Dayton, drawn out his retirement by dread more than duty, walked halfway across the blackened field before stopping. The fire didn't take them, he said. It just burned the skin. They left it sealed. No one dared open the cellar. Instead, the town declared the land cursed. The area was fenced, the path overgrown. Crops refused to take root within a mile. Babies born in that season cried with voices too deep. One child whispered a name in its sleep, Elias, and then never spoke again. Still, they tried to forget. But forgetting is a comfort granted only to the truly ignorant. Those who remember understand. What is buried never stays still. Years passed. Trees grew wild. The ash was covered with moss and ivy, but nothing grew atop the cellar. Even weeds avoided it. In time, the land sank slightly, as if the soil knew what festered below. A shallow depression, perfectly round. Some called it the mouth. Then, in 1843, the first dream came. A farmer's daughter, barely 9, woke screaming of hands pressing against her spine from beneath the bed. She claimed she saw a face in the floorboards, soft, pale, and smiling. That night, her father followed a sound outside, thinking it wolves. He never returned. They found his boots by the cellar hatch. No tracks, just boots, and a handprint on the iron padlock. It was inward-facing. The family fled town. More followed. Whispers grew louder than sermons. Rumors replaced fact. Some said the boys still lived, older now, dragging their bodies through soil instead of halls, their limbs long and boneless, eyes milky and wide. Others claimed Mary still sang beneath the ground, her lullabies echoing up through the roots, warping the orchard like a mother's hands shaping wet clay. One man, a trapper from Tennessee, dared the cellar. He pried the lock loose, took a crowbar to the hatch, said he wanted to prove ghosts were tales for weak men. He opened the door. It wasn't darkness inside. It was light, pale, flickering like gas lanterns submerged underwater. The scent hit first, sweet rot, iron, milk, and something like damp parchment. He descended the first 3 steps before stopping. Then he screamed, not in pain, in recognition. He dropped his lantern. It didn't break, but it went out. He climbed back up, trembling, whispering, "They're not children. They're not human. They're waiting for the world to shape like them." He was never right after that. Took to speaking in low tones to the trees, feeding his own hair to the wind. Eventually, he vanished into the orchard. Only his belt was found, wrapped around the base of a sapling. In time, the cellar was sealed again, this time with iron, poured by a blacksmith who claimed his dreams were filled with wet whispering. But even sealed, it whispered. Visitors spoke of hearing rustling below the earth. Not animals, not movement, language. In the deep hours of night, it was as if the house still stood. Each moan of wind to the burned beams like a step, a breath, a word. One woman swore she heard the creak of rocking chairs. Another said she saw light leaking through the cracks in the cellar door, faint and flickering. Yet no one opened it again, not even when a small, soot-stained shoe appeared outside the hatch one morning, perfectly preserved, with the name Enoch stitched on its inner sole in thread not sold for decades. Not even when the orchard began to lean again, tore that spot like it was listening. Not even when the animals started birthing stillborns with 2 long limbs. No one would go near, because the fire did not purge. It revealed. It stripped away the facade to shape the skin and show what was always there beneath. Ashes don't bury the past. They mark where it still breathes. And below the cellar, in the soil that remembers, in the earth still warm, something stirs. Something smiles. It has been nearly 50 years since the fire. The town has changed. Lanton Hollow is no longer a place on maps. Swallowed by industry, its soil parceled to loggers and railway men who saw trees, not history. The fields were tilled. The church was raised. A post office now stands where the chapel once gave whispered sermons to a frightened flock. Few speak the name Gorham. Fewer still remember the orchard, but it remembers them. I came here as a surveyor, hired by the state to clear forgotten deeds and map parcels for development. I thought the work would be dull, routine. The land is stubborn here, but the documents are clear, save for one parcel. Plot 43B, unclaimed, untouched, centered in the hollow basin where no grass grows, where trees bend wrong, and birds refuse to sing. I didn't understand at first, not until I found the cellar. It's still there, sunken now, veiled in vines and half swallowed by loam. The iron has rusted but not broken. Something has kept it sealed, something within. And yet it hums, not constantly, not loudly. But when the wind dies, when the light dims, there is a tremor, low and rhythmic, like a heartbeat in the soil. And beneath that, faint but clear, the sound of laughter, children's laughter. And I have begun to dream. The first came after my third night on the property. I saw them, 3 boys standing at the foot of my bed. Their faces were pale, mouths open, not speaking, not breathing, just watching. Their limbs were too long. Their eyes were not eyes. They blinked sideways. The second night, I dreamed of a tree that grew teeth. The third, of my mother weeping in the orchard, digging into the dirt with her hands, whispering, "They're back." They never left. That's when I began digging. I don't know why. A compulsion, maybe. A call. I set up camp near the old well, long since dried, lined with black moss. My tools clinked against something below. Not stone, not metal, bone, not human, not animal. Just shapes, pieces of something that had formed and then unformed. The earth around it pulsed when I touched them. I felt heat. I felt breath. And then I saw them again. Not in a dream. In the orchard, they stood beneath the trees, their bodies coated in ash and mud, their skins smooth and jointless. They did not move toward me. They did not speak. They simply were. And the trees moaned, not the creak of wood, but the remembrance of sound, as if the trunks were lungs, the roots vocal cords. And their voices, oh God, the voices came from below. I fled, but it doesn't matter now. Children have begun to go missing in towns nearby. Just a few, just far enough apart to be explained away. But their shoes are found near trees. Their names whispered on the wind. One boy was found wandering, naked and mute, pressing his forehead to the earth and whispering, "We're waiting for the shape." I tried to leave. The road warped behind me. The map blurred. And in my dreams, Mary Gorham whispers, "It was never a house. It was a door. And they've learned how to open it. They are older now. Not children. Not men. They are echoes, grown tall and hungry, shaped not by blood and bone, but by will, by need. They do not walk. They arrive. They do not speak. They fill the silence. And when they come, when they return, they do not knock. They remember. The cellar has cracked. This morning, the lock lay broken. The hatch was open, just a few inches. Enough to smell the sweet rot. Enough to hear the low thumping from below. Enough to see the handprint press in clay, small, perfect, wet. I leave this here, not as a warning, as a confession, because I opened the door, because I saw them crawl out, because I stood frozen as they passed me by, brushing my skin with fingers that left no mark, but took something all the same. They are walking the woods now. They have remembered the world. They are shaping it, one name at a time, and they are coming for yours.